The Virgin Way. By Richard Branson. This book explores Richard Branson's secrets of leadership, drawing on real-world examples from the author's decades of experience and eccentric way of doing business. This book is an insight into one of the world's most innovative minds. As a multi-billionaire and the owner of hundreds of successful businesses, Richard Branson knows a thing or two about leadership. This legendary leader has put pen to paper to share over 4 decades of triumph, failure, and lessons about the Virgin Way to lead. In this book summary, you will discover what leadership lesson Branson learned from his father, how procrastination saved him from the financial crash, and why innovators are always being told no. Lesson 1. Branson's upbringing made him a compassionate leader. As a young boy, Branson often visited the local shop to buy chocolate bars. Unfortunately, he paid for his chocoholic habit by stealing small change from his parents' bedroom. When the shopkeeper eventually told his father of her suspicions, the young Branson expected a mighty punishment. But to his surprise, his father took little action. He didn't even acknowledge that he knew about the theft. In fact, all his father did was give his son the cold shoulder for the rest of the day. Though he escaped punishment, Branson never stole his parents' money again. Why? Because he knew full well that he had disappointed his father. His father's silence made that clear, and no harsh punishment was needed. As an adult and an employer of tens of thousands of people, Branson has tried to live up to his dad's example. When Branson was running Virgin Records, he became aware that one of his younger employees was stealing records and selling them to other stores. Though Branson would have every reason to fire him, he remembered his own experience of stealing and his father's kindness. Thus, after privately confronting the employees about this theft, he gave him a second chance and allowed him to keep his job. The result? Just like the younger Branson, this employee never stole anything again. Moreover, he became a great asset to the company, discovering several hit artists, including the singer Boy George. Lesson 2. The ability to truly listen is the true secret of business success. When it comes to qualities we look for in a leader, listening features rather far down on the list. Instead, we focus on their powers of speaking skills. Over 4 decades ago, Branson started a lifelong habit of listening intently to what others had to say, and diligently noting down any interesting remarks they made. As a teenager, Branson interviewed the famous novelist John L. Kerr for his magazine, Student. Although he usually bowed a tape recorder to his interviews, it was old and rarely worked. As such, he began diligently noting down his interviewees' responses. And the behavior stuck. These days he has hundreds of notebooks, filled with his own and others' reflections. And it's not just Branson himself whose career has benefited from a policy of careful listening and note-taking. In the 1990s, for instance, Branson gave a speech in Greece about his business. During the question and answer session with the audience, one young man stood out. Not only did he ask excellent questions, but he also listened intently enough to ask great follow-up questions, and even wrote down Branson's answers. Who was this eager young man? He is Sir Stelios Hagioannou, founder of one of the UK's most successful airlines, EasyJet. To Branson's mind, Ioannou's incredible success just goes to show how far a thirst for listening, and a passion for note-taking can take you. Lesson 3. A successful company is also a fun one. What does a winning company culture look like? Well, Branson believes it comes down to everyone, from executives and managers to junior employees, being highly serious about having fun. Indeed, before Virgin became the business it is today, the organization consisted of little more than Branson and his workmates kicking back on beanbags in Virgin Records' only shop, having a great time. This was simply a group of people who enjoyed their jobs and the company of their colleagues. Sure, the going was tough sometimes. Hard work and long hours were often part of the equation. But the reason Virgin is so successful today is that everyone involved played as hard as they worked. Late-night partying is actually commonplace at Virgin. Branson has witnessed this thoroughly fun-loving culture in other successful organizations too. One company that exemplifies this culture is Southwest Airlines, a low-cost Texas-based airline. For much of its 40-year history, larger-than-life founder Herb Kelleher has steered the company. Leading by example, Herb has always tried to inject some fun into his business. When a competitor almost sued Southwest for copying their marketing tagline "Just Plain Smart," Herb persuaded the other company's CEO to settle their dispute with an arm wrestle. Their customers are also treated to the cabin staff's unique sense of humor. One group of passengers once boarded their plane, only to find that the flight attendants were nowhere to be seen. Where were they? Hiding in the overhead bins, of which they promptly jumped out, shouting surprise. The result of all the silliness. Not only is Southwest Airlines a great place to work, but in competitive industry, it's also the only airline company in history to turn a profit for 40 years straight. Lesson 4. Luck favors the brave and the well-prepared. The first album that Virgin Records ever released was Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells. Unfortunately, though the album was a hit in UK, Branson was having a hard time selling it to head of Atlantic Records, Ahmet Ertegun, who thought the record would be unpopular with American audiences. One day, after many phone calls from Branson, Ertegun sat in his office and gave Tubular Bells another listen. Into his office walked the film director William Friedkin, who immediately asked what the music was. On the spot, Friedkin decided it would be perfect as the soundtrack to his upcoming movie. That movie turned out to be The Exorcist, the hit horror film. Not only did Atlantic Records buy the album, but the film also brought it to worldwide fame. Of course, the fact that Friedkin walked in and heard the record was a great piece of luck, but would Ertegun have been listening to that album if Branson hadn't pressured him to give it another try? Probably not. Another key ingredient for cooking up your own luck is courage. When Branson's friend Antonio was a student at Stanford University, he randomly struck up a conversation with a stranger next to him in a cinema queue, who also turned out to be a student. Spontaneously, they decided to go for coffee together, where the stranger told Antonio that he and a friend were launching a company. When they finished, the stranger showed him what his company was working on. Though their research was too technical for Antonio to understand, he thought the idea had potential. The very next day he pledged to give the student the $10,000 he'd been saving up to buy a car with. This bought his 1% share in their nascent business. A pretty brave move, you'd probably agree. What was that business? Today it's known as Google. That stranger was Sergey Brin. Antonio still has his 1% stake, but now it's worth billions of dollars. Sure, it was lucky that he went for coffee that day. But this piece of luck wouldn't have meant anything if Antonio hadn't had the guts to take a big risk with his money. Lesson 5. Procrastinate your way to a great decision. Virgin's entry into the aviation industry was the result of a quick decision on Branson's part. Instead of doing market research that would usually accompany such move, he decided his gut instinct was sufficient and quickly launched Virgin Atlantic, and later, Virgin Blue. Although these two ventures were commercial successes, Branson's hasty judgment hasn't always been so fateful. A similar snap decision was to launch the soda Virgin Cola in 1984 and Virgin Brides in 1996. Unfortunately, neither of these ventures were profitable. Nowadays, as a seasoned entrepreneur with decades of both success and failure under his belt, Branson subscribes to a decision-making approach that's best described as purposeful procrastination. In other words, when he's presented with a decision, he and his team take as much time as possible to work out the best course of action. This cautious strategy has proved highly rewarding. Several years ago, Branson was approached by Goldman Sachs and offered the opportunity to invest in a little-known financial commodity. Almost immediately, members of Branson's Virgin Money team were recommending he jump on board. However, as Branson himself had never heard of the commodity, he insisted that his team dig deeper and try to uncover more potential downsides of investing. Eventually, after an intensive fact-finding mission, and with Goldman Sachs pushing him for an answer, Branson politely declined. Interestingly, that hot financial commodity turned out to be subprime mortgages. The very thing that would blow up the corporate world in 2007 and cause a global financial crash. Furthermore, in 2010, Goldman Sachs was fined $550 million for handing out misleading, incomplete information to potential investors. As Branson now knows, Virgin received that incomplete information. It was only thanks to his purposeful procrastination that they didn't lose a lot of money, as well as their reputation, in the scandal. Lesson 6. Conventional wisdom is often the enemy of innovation. When the first megastore was launched in New York, Branson chose Times Square as the location. In 1996, Times Square was considered scary. Many told Branson the New Yorkers simply wouldn't go to that part of town. Well, they were wrong. Not only did the Times Square megastore quickly begin making weekly sales of over $1 million, but its presence helped trigger the redevelopment of the whole Times Square area. This isn't the only time Branson has proved his critics wrong. After launching Virgin Atlantic, Branson realized that up to 40% of the average passenger's travel time was actually spent on the ground, often waiting in the departure lounge. Thus, he decided to make this experience every bit as luxurious as that spent flying. While other airlines neglected their passengers on the ground, offering them little more than bad coffee, Virgin Atlantic launched clubhouse departure lounges that offered sit-down meals, business centers, haircuts, and even massages. Moreover, their amazing benefits were all included in the price of the flight, which Virgin's critics believed would make them financially unsustainable. Once again, Branson proved them wrong. Indeed, Virgin Atlantic's offerings were so desirable to passengers that even customers loyal to other airlines began to switching over, leaving Virgin's competitors scrambling to add swanky departure lounges to their own offerings. So, don't let conventional wisdom stand in your way. If you have got a great idea, pursue it. Lesson 7. The leaders of tomorrow need to be guided toward entrepreneurship. The entrepreneurs of the future will need to take risks, deal with failure, and be unafraid to challenge convention. If you spend some time talking to your average teenager, you will probably notice they have these qualities in spades. Unfortunately, many schools believe free-thinking young people should have these qualities drummed out of them in the classroom. And what are they replaced with? The status quo. Instead of encouraging kids to realize their true potential or indulge their curiosity and see what career it leads to, teachers encourage children to enter the same jobs and professions that their teachers probably suggested, too. The upshot of this approach is that children are taught an outdated curriculum, in which algebra is valued over understanding human emotions, and calculus is taught instead of critical thinking. So, how can our schools start preparing our children for the future? Crucially, they need to get real-life entrepreneurs into the classroom to start talking to young people about their work. Branson still remembers with frustrations that the only job his teachers ever talked about was teaching. To open young people's eyes to a world of possibilities, educators need to engage with those who have chosen different paths themselves. Moreover, if you're an entrepreneur talking to young people, don't be afraid to focus on the failure you've encountered, as well as your successes. Remember, tales of resilience in the face of hardship are every bit as valuable to young minds as those of triumph. In summary, success in business is a combination of hard work, luck, and having the courage to follow your convictions. As a successful entrepreneur, Branson has learned that doing things your own way is nearly always better than sticking to the status quo.